I was scrolling through some socials the other day, and in one of the camper groups that I'm on, there was a guy getting a chassis made for a camper, very similar to this, I suppose. And the manufacturer of the chassis had got back to him and suggested that they put leaf springs on it instead of a more expensive option. He couldn't understand why you would do that. And I just thought to myself, the marketing spin in the camper caravan world is absolutely huge. I see it here, and I saw it in the comments after he put up that post of everyone's perception of what you should have. So today I thought we'd run through what is a really important piece on your chassis. I think a lot of the chassis on these smaller campers are discounted. A lot of the time people are after the cheapest chassis that they can get to build their dream camper on, which is a real worry, because when you're stuck by the side of the road with a broken chassis or a broken suspension component, it just ruins the whole trip. But anyway, today I thought we'd have a chat about suspension systems, the different options and why you wouldn't. So stay tuned. Hey guys, I'm Daryl, welcome to the channel. Before we start with the camper stuff, it's been a really big month in my family. My son Christopher married his fiancée Nicole. Gorgeous wedding and reception. They held it at Taronga Zoo overlooking the harbour in Sydney, and yeah, lovely night, lovely couple, and we just wish them all the best in their life together. Although, super spreader event. It was either the wedding or the day after, the family catch up the day after with Nicole's family. We came down with COVID the week after, and yeah, it's just knocked us for 6, but still a little bit foggy, but I'm not showing any symptoms now, and we're on our way out. So yeah, hopefully that's all over. And to top it off, my 3-year-old 16-inch Mac Pro laptop decided just to shit itself. It was like, I normally get far longer than this. So it's been a good, a bad, and an expensive month. So anyway, let's get back on with the camper stuff. Now let's have a quick chat about some common misconceptions with suspension on any type of camper, really. Single axle camper is, someone will come up and they'll say, oh, I go heavy 4-wheel driving, I'm looking for something with wheel travel. And it's like, that's great, but do you realise that we're working with a triangle, so where the bottom, the widest 2 points are your wheels, it goes up to a point which is where it attaches to the vehicle, and the hitch allows movement. So before the wheels travel, it'll actually just move the whole camper around. That's the extreme view. Yes, they will travel with small bumps and load on them and everything like that, but if you think you're going to max out travel like you do your 4-wheel drive, it's not going to happen. Yes, there's some really nice designs that in their marketing blurb they show a lot of wheel travel happening over jumps and things like that. Bruder do that. They have a really nice little package there, but you do pay for it. Actually, I've got some footage. Let's have a look at the good suspension with good wheel travel, and let's have a look at a quick look at the Bruder marketing. And now let's have a look at one not so good. This is a Timbren design. I'm not going to say the make of camper, but it's on some of the blurbs they've put out. And I just looked at this footage and thought, all that tells me is that you're skull dragging this camper through something and it's bouncing around everywhere, and it's got really terrible suspension on it for what you're trying to show. So let's have a quick look at that. So you can see between the two what really good suspension design that's very costly, and quite cheap suspension design that is quite good for some applications, but not for what they're trying to show in this marketing blurb. So anyway, you can't believe all the marketing blurb. When we're looking at putting suspension in one of these things, we want suspension that will carry the planned load that we're looking to carry. So let's say this camper is 800 kilos. I don't want suspension underneath this thing that's rated to 2.5 tonne, because we're carrying 0.8 of a tonne, and you know, even loaded up, let's say this is 850 kilos. We don't need that load carrying capacity, and what it would mean is that if we had 2.5 tonnes worth of suspension underneath it that was capable of carrying that, we all know the box trailer, that you know, the half-tonne box trailer or 1 tonne box trailer that empty just skips along the road behind the vehicle, but when you load it up, it actually sits quite nice because its intended purpose is to carry X amount of load. These are no different. I've been looking at a chassis lately, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous chassis. It's also about 14k, and it's like, if I was to design another camper, this would be a really nice chassis for it. But the ATX Cruisemaster system that comes with it, the lowest rated spring is a 2.2 tonne, and it's like, I don't know if that'd be too much suspension for what my plan would be. And if I was to spend that much on a chassis, the camper probably would weigh more than this, because I'd go for a queen size bed inside it and blah blah blah, and it probably wouldn't be towed by my current vehicle, so the requirements to keep it under a certain tow rating would be out the window. However, 2200 kilos on any type of teardrop / square top drop camper is far too much. But because that ATX Cruisemaster suspension is independent, I'm sure you could get a set of coils made that would be 1500, 1600 kilos, which would be far more suitable than 2200. But something to keep in mind, no matter what suspension design you're choosing to put onto your new chassis, or upgrade your current chassis, you don't want too much load carrying capacity, but conversely you don't want too little. So there is a just right area. Now, we can't chat about suspension systems on lightweight single axle campers without chatting about leaf spring systems. They're still as relevant today as they were, you know, years ago. This chassis was made in 1963 for the Australian Army, hence it has leaf springs on it. I don't mind leaf springs. They're rugged as they'll basically always get you home. If you've got a military wrap on the second leaf, we'll go into that into a moment, and there's hardly any maintenance on them. They're a really good thing. But first up, let's look about the different types of leaf spring system on single axle lightweight campers. The first one, and the cheapest and the most basic pack, would be a set of slipper springs. They have an eye with a bush at the front of the spring pack, and at the back, instead of having a similar eye and bush with a shackle, they just have a tail. And that tail gets enclosed within a hanger, and that hanger will be just basically a square section that's welded to the chassis, and it just sits enclosed in that, and it has a bolt going through the bottom, or it has the square section so it can't drop only a certain amount, but basically it runs metal to metal with the top of that hanger, and what it does mean is that if pressure comes off a tyre because of road conditions, the whole back of the spring will move down and then clang back up when pressure comes back onto these. They're mainly suited for tar road use. I wouldn't like to be using them constantly on dirt roads, but they'd probably be okay. But it's just not a very elegant solution. And to be honest, with the cost of leaf spring suspension components nowadays, I don't see why you'd use them in any camper. I just don't see why you would. And if you see people using them, they're really cutting cost, or they're cutting cost and they'll never take the camper off a tar road, which is and the camper's probably 300 kilos or something, which is okay. But with the price of double-ended spring packs nowadays, I just don't see why you do it. But if you see commercial campers that have, they're using slipper springs, go over the rest of the camper and see where else they're cutting costs, because they're really cutting costs to try and maintain some profit margin. The other set of springs, as I've alluded to, are the twin eye design with a shackle at the back. These are really nice because they're held in situ with a bush either end. The front bush, as per the slipper spring, goes into a fixed hanger. The rear has a movable shackle, so that as the spring comes up, the shackle can move back. You have to be careful when you're setting them up and welding them to the chassis, that when you drop all the weight off the spring, that the shackle doesn't invert. If it does invert, it may not come back when weight comes back on them. I've seen that years ago when we only had leaf spring four-wheel drives and people were putting springs that had lots of arch in them. Shackles that invert, and they'd have to, get a crowbar out and re-invert them. So you need to be careful of that when you're setting them up. But basically, once they're set up, if you get a spring pack that's suitable for the weight that you're carrying, there's not a lot of maintenance. There's, greasing of bushings, replacing of bushings, and there's only 2 of them in this design, 3, with the chassis bush on the shackle. But apart from that, every so often, every 5 or 10 years, pull the spring pack apart, clean it up, re-grease between the leaves, and put a new centre bolt in them, and you'll probably get another 5 or 10 years out of them. One thing to note, if you're buying eye-to-eye springs, make sure they've got a military wrap on the second leaf. What that does is the second leaf goes around the eyes at each end. It's more than half and around 3/4. It's around there somewhere. And what that does is, if you ever break a main leaf, it'll hold the pack together, so that you can probably just get a piece of wood and some fencing wire and, strap it all up and drive home on it. You can't say that if you break an A-arm on a independent system. So these are rugged as, and it's why they've been used for years in, farming and off-road situations. What they're not good at is the initial movement on a independent system is generally more cushier than these. And at the end of the day, a really good independent system will be nicer to tow than even a good quality leaf spring system, but there's not going to be that much in it. You're not going to tow that and then tow this and go, I hated it. Especially if you've got a shock mounted on these things like this. It just adds a little bit of subtlety to the suspension system. A couple of other things though is that with leaf springs, with the axle, you can mix and match components. So whilst you may get a leaf spring pack that will be suitable for what load you're carrying in your camper, I've gone for a 1500 kilo axle on this, which is probably overkill. However, the reason I did that was that I got a nice set of electronic brakes on this, and more importantly, I got some parallel bearings, which are far bigger and easier to get and last far longer than if I bought a lighter weight axle. Bearings on campers are something you really need to look after. If you don't, they will fail, and they will fail at the worst possible time. And I just think the option to run the biggest bearings that you can, that are really readily available and easy to fit, they're not going to get as hot as the smaller bearings. The parallel bearings are easy to get anywhere, and they're easy to get in and out. So I've probably gone over the top with bearing size, but it means that I have peace of mind going forward, and they're probably not going to need the maintenance that a smaller set of bearings would need anyway. So I can mix and match, but as I said, a lot of the independent systems, because you do buy an independent system as a package, and you generally find with those it's like, well, this is the stub axle, this is the A-arm, this is the bearing set that come with it, and it is what it is. And unless you're buying the really good quality systems, you don't know what you're getting. The next step up, once you get out of a solid axle leaf spring, are independent suspensions. And I see independent suspensions come in two types. The first type is the more simple, all-in-one Timbren unit. There's a lot of love for Timbren with these small types of campers. They're a lightweight camper and the Timbren unit suits them very well. I think for a road-based independent system that you're using on some reasonable dirt roads a lot, they're a pretty good outlet. They're an all-in-one unit. They come pre-drilled. You basically just bolt them to the chassis and you're good to go. They're a very simple unit too. You've basically got a metal hanger with some urethane bushes. You've got a swing arm that goes through those bushes. At the end of the swing arm, you've got your stub axle mounting, and to control the suspension on it, you don't have springs or airbags. You've got rubber johnsters, so you've got one for rebound and one for compression, and that's it. From what I've seen of them being used, if you're using them within the realms that I think they're designed for, I think they're a pretty good unit. The only problem that I see with them is that once you get into independent, you need the ability to align your wheels for any idiosyncrasies of your chassis, and or if things wear. Because with independent suspension, you need adjustment for camber and toe in. And with the Timbren units, camber is adjusted via shims. So you've got to undo the stub axle, place some shims in it, do it back up. For me, I don't like that. I'd like something that a full independent suspension gives you, where you've got adjustments with just a spanner for camber and toe in. But I think for a reasonably good cheap buy-in, and if you're not expecting too much out of them, you're not expecting it to be the brooder of independent suspensions like the video I showed at the beginning of today's episode, they're not a bad thing. So Timbren, they're easy to fit, easy to look after, and keep them within the realms that I think they're designed for, and I reckon you'd be pretty happy with them. Now, once you get past the Timbren setup, you go to a full independent suspension system. We're not talking about the brooder type of independent suspension system. We're talking about something that will generally have an A-shaped arm at the bottom. There'll be two mounts at the front of that arm so the arm can swing. At the back of that arm, there'll be a mount for your stub axle that your bearings and your brakes or whatever and your hubs will attach to. You'll have a mount on that arm for an airbag or a coil spring. You'll also have a top mount for that airbag or top spring. All of that, they generally give you all the bits you need ready to weld in. They'll give you all the measurements that you need, and they're a really good setup. You'll also have a shock or two that hangs off them. A lot of them have two shocks. I don't know why, because one's probably all that's needed. But independent suspension systems like this are seen as very sexy on these types of campers. And I must admit, it is a nice look to see a good independent suspension system set up on these things. If I was to go, I've talked about the chassis that I was looking at before. Cruisemaster does some really nice independent suspension systems. That's top end. You may not have to go to there, but if I was buying a independent suspension system, I would go Cruisemaster. Whichever you are in their range, they're good, you know they're going to work. I would be really concerned about buying cut price independent suspension systems. They're out there, you see them all the time, you look at them and then you go, Jesus, that's cheap. But you're getting to the point where they're Chinese made, you don't know what testing's gone into them, or if any. And these things are suspension systems that, you know, if they break, the holiday's over. There was a lot of independent suspension systems breaking a few years ago. There was a manufacturer bringing over Chinese-made camper trailers, the rear fold or front fold type of thing. And apart from chassis on them also breaking, they were having problems with the arms on the independent suspension systems cracking. And there was a whole heap of people that you'd see them post up on, you know, Facebook or forums that I'm in the middle of an outback trip on such and such dirt road, and the suspension system's collapsed, and I've had to get a flatbed out here to get the camper back to wherever I need to get it back to, or towed home. It was a real worry for a while, and again, I hark back to when you're looking at cheap suspension systems like that, if they would have had a good quality leaf setup, if they broke a top leaf with a military wrap on the second leaf, they could have got home. Like, they could have, you know, got a branch off a tree, cut it to size, wired it up and got home. But no, they had to get a flatbed out to in the middle of nowhere at whatever cost to take the camper back. So yeah, you've just got to be really careful what you buy. So let's try and draw some conclusions from today. If I was to build a camper and I wanted parameters similar to if I owned a Subaru Outback. So it'd be mostly tar roads, some well-graded dirt roads, but nothing too over the top. I think a Timbren system, if I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money, wouldn't be a bad option. It would give me some benefits in ride, and it would be an easy fit to the chassis. Yeah, I think a Timbren system for that sort of outcome is not a bad thing. If I had a Jeep Wrangler or a Land Cruiser or a Patrol or a Land Rover or any of that, you know, four-wheel drives that I don't know where I could end up, but it could be quite rugged, be that an Outback, track, or wherever. If I didn't want to spend a lot of money, I'd go leaf springs, good quality leaf springs, live axle. And if I wanted to throw some money at it, I'd go good quality independent suspension. I think everything has its place, and I think if you look at those parameters, you won't be disappointed. For me, knowing how I use vehicles, I'd be the end one. It'd be, if I didn't want to spend a lot of money, I'd go leaf springs. If I wanted to throw cash at it, just because, and wanted something that was quite sexy in appearance and worked very, very well, it would be probably one of the Cruisemaster independent systems. And more than likely, the top-end Cruisemaster system, we'd be looking at spring rates, and I do like how they've got a sway bar on them. Make of it what you will. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you can get something out of that, but that's my opinion. So thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.